Okay, so for that fermentation process with you said wet fruit and seeds, is that done here, or is that done like for people sending you the seeds?
Any farm that's growing seeds that mature inside wet fruits would be doing that fermentation process.
Okay.
So that includes this farm, but not limited to this farm.
Okay, what's involved in that process?
Mashing up the fruits. It depends somewhat on the kind of fruits, but generally mashing up the wet part of the fruits, like the pulp around the squash seeds, or the whole tomato, or the flesh of the watermelon, mashing it up, letting it sit in buckets or in jars or in other small containers if you're doing smaller amounts for, depending on the kind of seed, usually 1 to 4 days, and then adding water so that the seeds will separate more easily from the pulp. The pulp will tend to disperse throughout the water, and the good viable seeds will tend to sink. So we would add water and then pour off as much of the pulp as is easy to, and then add more water and repeat that process until pretty much all of the pulp has been removed and until the seeds seem clean enough to put into packets.
So what's the point of the fermentation?
The fermentation has several purposes, and it's most useful with tomatoes, I would say, but it's also useful with other seeds that mature in wet fruits. The fermentation process reduces the risk of certain seed-borne diseases, and it also helps make the seeds easier to process. Like, it helps make it so that pepper seeds can be more easily broken off their ribs and core of the pepper fruit. It makes it so that the coating, the gelatinous coating that's around tomato seeds tends to basically disintegrate, and then it's easier to dry them and pack them and manipulate the tomato seeds. Tomato seeds and maybe some other seeds have a coating that actually tends to inhibit germination, and fermentation breaks that down. I think that's probably, at least for tomato seeds, that's probably the main advantage of the fermentation process, is that it breaks down that coating and it makes it so that more of the seeds are going to be ready to germinate fast.
Cool.
Ready to germinate soon.
To get that fermentation...
Like the other things, the risk of seed-borne disease is small anyway. Is very small anyway, even without any fermentation process.
To get that fermentation process started, you literally just put the fruit in there. Do you add any other yeast or bacteria?
Nope. Basically, when you're fermenting seeds that mature inside wet fruit, you're simulating the process that those seeds would go through if they were on a wild ancestor of that plant, instead of on the plant that you're actually taking them off of. So like the wild ancestors of a plant that has seeds that mature inside a wet fruit, sometimes that fruit would sit around and rot on the ground, or on the bush, or get stepped on by an animal, or get picked apart, and you're kind of making the process more even and smoother and more consistent by fermenting them for a particular amount of time, instead of, letting some of them sit around and get moldy and other ones get mashed up and just rinsed right away. You're making the process more consistent by doing a fermentation process and stirring every 12 hours or so, about twice a day. The plants that have seeds that mature inside wet fruits are evolved to reproduce when they stay wet inside the juices that plant is producing. That's how they've evolved to reproduce.
Okay, and is this fermentation process pretty common amongst seed companies, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially for tomatoes. For tomatoes, it's extremely helpful. For other seeds that mature in wet fruits, it's moderately helpful.
Okay.
But not actually completely necessary.
Very cool information.
Great.